So, hello everyone. Welcome to this BIC Brunch webinar. My name is Karina Urquhart and I'm the Executive Director of BIC and your host for this BIC Brunch event today, which is all about STEM and scholarly publishing in light of the EU Accessibility Act. If I could have the next slide, please, Richard. So just some housekeeping before we get started. So questions will be taken at the end of the presentations from Richard and James. But please do feel free to put your questions into the question box. You should have a question box on your little toolkit. You should have a little toolkit at some point somewhere on your screen. So pop your question in there. At any time, so we'll answer those, we'll get to those once Richard and James are finished. The event's been recorded for BIC to use in its marketing and on its YouTube channel to allow people that can't attend today to enjoy it later. And please be reassured you won't be identified in the recording, even if you ask a question. This session is going to explore STEM and scholarly publishing. However, that said, it should not be considered in any way to be legal advice. None of us are lawyers, by any individual or organisation that's attending today. And we won't be addressing any business-specific issues. Finally, a gentle reminder that BIC is a neutral membership organisation, and as such, we politely ask that our attendees and speakers and me avoid any conversations or questions that might be considered commercially sensitive or anti-competitive. So that's all very formal. It's nice to get that out of the way. And we'll be sharing the slides later on. So if you don't get a chance to write down all the links that you're going to see, don't panic. They'll be coming to you later on. So here's the agenda for the session. Very simple one. We have our fantastic speakers here today, as I've already said. Richard Orme, CEO at Daisy Consortium. Now, I'm sure if some of you may already be working on your accessibility compliance, so you may already be very familiar with Daisy, but for those of you who aren't, Daisy is an international non-profit even membership organisation working with over 150 partners all around the world to improve access to reading for people with print disabilities. And we also have James Janczak, Production Technologies Manager at Taylor & Francis Group, one of the world's leading academic publishers, who reminded me or pointed out to me before we were about to start that the deadline for EAA compliance, I don't know if I want to say this, is only 149 days away. Just let that hang there for a minute. As I've already mentioned, Q&A session at the end, round about 1:10 or somewhere around there, and we should be finished by 1:30. So before we get into the main body of the session, just a little bit about BIC, for those of you who aren't familiar with us. So BIC is a UK-based members organisation at the heart of the book industry, and we create standards, best practices and resources to help organisations become more efficient, save money, become less wasteful, and ultimately greener. We hold a unique position of trust, facilitating UK and international industry-wide collaboration to reach agreement on dependable standards and best practice in the supply chain. We do this in a variety of ways, including running 5 strategic committees focusing on digital, metadata, libraries, physical and green supply chains. And we offer training events and workshops and execute supply chain related projects and initiatives for and on behalf of our membership, but also the wider book industry as well. We also operate 3 industry recognised accreditation schemes. You can find out more about what we do on our website. There are links on the page. So that's enough about BIC. Before we get started though, I just want to introduce, for those of you who haven't yet seen it, our Accessibility Hub, which is new, or relatively new. It's a new resource and it's free for everyone to access and covers a variety of topics, including industry standards, organisations working on accessibility, training courses, the impact of all this work on end users, validation tools, our accessibility webinar series, and much more. So go and take a look. You don't have to be a member you don't have to be a big member to have a look at that. So it's absolutely free for everyone to go and dive into. It's a resource that will be updated over time. So if you have any questions or any resources or ideas that you would like to see on there that perhaps we don't yet have, just let me know, get in touch. So back to today's session. This is the 6th one in our accessibility webinar series, which is currently running from now until April, May, and probably beyond. We started in July with a back to basics session, looking at, what is accessibility, what are the legal sort of requirements, etc. So all the recordings are on our YouTube channel if you've missed any of those. But today we're all about STEM and scholarly publishing. Our speakers today will be showing us worked examples, helpful hints and tips, common pitfalls to avoid, with a bit of an insight into the publisher journey to address all the requirements of EAA in this area. So today, James and Richard will be co-speaking, and between them, they'll be covering the following topics. So just a quick little run through of some of the areas they'll be covering. So they'll be looking at publishing responsibilities on the journey towards EAA compliance. We'll be looking at authors, publishers, and distribution partners, content structure and associated responsibilities, symbols, tables, extended expressions, Unicode and associated responsibilities, scientific expression, MathML, and much more. And if we're really lucky and the technology works, which I hope it does, we'll have a demo. So Richard will be in the hot seat for that one. So let's keep everything crossed that that actually works today. So that was a bit of a fast run through, and it does sound like a lot to get through in the next hour or so. So and what you'll probably hear emphasised throughout is that as an industry, we're all in this together. So we'll be hearing about the importance and the need for collaboration between different types of stakeholders. Anyway, that's enough from me. Without further ado, then I'm going to hand over to James and Richard for the next part of this session. So James, I believe you're up first.
Okay.
Actually,
it's go ahead, Richard.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Richard. Yeah. I do apologise.
No problem. James will have plenty of chances to speak. So hi folks, looking forward to your comments and your questions. And of course, looking forward to what James has to say. But first of all, I'm making this general point. We're all in this together, but for accessibility work, we have to have all the ducks in a row. And since we're all playing with AI and generative AI at the moment, on the screen is this amusing image that I think Google Genesis came up with some rather smartly dressed ducks all standing in a row. When we're thinking about moving the kind of model from adapting materials for students with disabilities, which we know is inefficient, it's slow and very variable, we're quickly moving to a world where readers can access scientific, technical, and scholarly publications, accessing the same book, not an adapted book that's been made especially for them, and therefore they were getting it at the same time, in the same place, and whether or not they identify as having a disability. And I'm sure we'll mention a few times that making an accessible publication is making a better publication for everyone. But from the user's perspective, there are several things that need to line up for their reading experience to work well, and various people who have responsibilities to make that work. So if we think about the user experience, their assistive technology, if they're using assistive technology, that needs to be compatible with the solutions that they're using and have the features that they need. And not every piece of assistive technology is able to deal with the more complex materials that come with scholarly publications. Also, the app that they're using, the reading experience, whether that's a native app or whether that's through the browser, that has to work well with their assistive technology and the content that they're accessing. And the digital publication needs to include the features that they rely on for an equitable experience. And we're going to speak a lot about the content side of things, but just noting there are different responsibilities here. And when things don't work well, the user will sometimes be confused as to whether or not it's their assistive technology or the app they're using, or is it the book or publication they're accessing. All these things need to line up on the technology side. And on the responsibility side, clearly it's more than one person's job to ensure an accessible reading experience. So James, tell us about the publishing responsibilities when it comes to STEM and scholarly stuff.
So STEM, for those who don't know, is science, technical, engineering, and medical. This is a particular group of publishers who do more than just publish books. We're helping advance research, we're helping to educate on practices, and we're bringing knowledge to scientists, technicians, engineers, medical professionals, and educators. This carries a lot of technical requirements, and this is where the publishers really provide a service. The publishers are the ones that need to step forward and understand all of the specifications which drive our content to the audience. Things like MathML, XML, DOIs, Onyx feeds, accessibility, PDF formats, and EPUB formats are all things the publisher, not the author, the publisher has to understand and be able to convert everything into one of those forms so it can smoothly go downstream to those ebook readers. For the authors, they have a very special responsibility. The authors have to, one, be an expert in their area. These are usually very technical and very specific areas, which means they have to be capable of communicating that technical knowledge, regardless of its complexity. This means they have to understand how to create equations and tables and use proper scientific symbols, and they have to have the software which supports all that use. And then distributors, as I mentioned earlier, these are the people after the publisher who actually get the content to the user. This could be a private bookseller, it could be a university library, a research institute, even an online service provider. Regardless of who they are, they have to have the means and the systems to be able to properly deliver it to. I'm getting feedback. Okay. But so the distributors have to be able to deliver it with the proper systems, adhering to those specifications I noted earlier. Next slide.
So then let's think about what structure means in terms of an end user and why structure is especially important when it comes to someone reading scientific, technical, engineering, medical, or scholarly publications. So an end user, especially one who has low vision or cognitive difficulties, will often make real use of the table of contents, more so than a user who does not declare having a reading impairment. They may use the table of contents as a way of orienting their way around what the publication includes, and they'll certainly use it to navigate. It's often we refer to the kind of extra navigation that comes with a well-structured digital publication as being their new superpower. How materials have been made accessible in the past, for example, through audio or through embossed braille, finding your way to a subsection within a chapter was a pretty laborious process, scrubbing your way through an audio tape or whatever. But using a well-structured table of contents, maybe with hierarchical structure, is really, really important for referencing more complex materials. And then when one has found the way within a publication, you're in a chapter, say, often there'll be sections and subsections and maybe elements within it. And someone who's using assistive technology such as a screen reader they're able to use the powers of that screen reader to jump around quickly. What they can't do is look at the screen and see, oh, there's a heading here, or quickly scan through the pages if they're non-visual. But by using the navigation features of their screen reader, by setting the navigation to heading, they can do this whether they're using a touch screen on a smartphone or whether they're using a keyboard with a screen reader. They can jump between the headings, and by making sure that the headings are at appropriate levels, they could skip over headings too. If they just want to look at heading level 2, they can press the 2 button, and that will move them between heading level 2, and they'll skip over all those smaller sections or less lower rank sections, heading level 3 and 4 or whatever. So jumping with headings is another important accessibility power that comes with a well-made digital publication. And then it's also important to know where someone is in order to maybe cite a reference if they're completing an assignment or writing a paper, or they may be required to go to a specific piece of the publication, go to a particular print page, for example. And so ensuring that digital publications are created in such a way that they have all of this rich structural information is especially important for people who are using assistive technologies, because they need to be able to understand the content, navigate around the content, and know where they are with real confidence. Of course, this all makes for a better publication for everyone. So what does this mean in practice for the publisher then, James?
So we start with the author, of course. The author can assist this whole process by using the pre-established tags within their authoring program. Most programs like that will have things like headings, basic text, lists, tables, and other constructs like that. By using those, you've already taken a step to adding the structure. By identifying the headings, the lists, the paragraphs, it really makes the publisher's job of converting it into a structured environment a lot easier. More importantly, it gives the author the chance, when they're doing this, to ensure that the content matches the outline and the intended progression of the content. Now, for the publisher, we extend the publisher's work. We actually go in and add the structure, as mentioned earlier. This includes a mechanical approach like nesting sections, generating a table of contents, identifying the reason something is tagged or structured as it is. Some of this identification is done by the copy editor. Some is done by a structural specialist like a typesetter or ebook conversion team. The whole driver behind this is consistency. It is the key. It allows the publisher to approach work in mass and use a systematic approach. That way, all their content follows the same rules, the same overall structure. At a minimum, a STEM publisher should identify and use the same structures as HTML. This identifies paragraphs, headings, lists, quotes, tables, media, and formatting. It also provides a core system to navigate the ebook once you apply a structured framework like sections and headers and navigation aids. Beyond just adding tags to content, as I noted earlier, the publisher needs to identify the reason for the tag. This may guide which tags actually utilized. For example, the italic word Moby Dick. It's likely a book title. You wouldn't just call it italic, you actually use the cite tag, which is used for titles. It infers a meaning to that. Visually, both tags, italic and cite, look the same, but that cite tag goes beyond just the visual cue. Next slide.
Okay, so we're moving from structure to symbols because, of course, STEM publishers will be using more than just the letters of the Latin alphabet. And maybe we thought it would be interesting for you to hear how a screen reader reads symbols such as those that I've got up on the screen. So let's hear that now.
Alpha, beta, gamma, psi, euro, 2/5, waving hand, crossed fingers, microscope, canoe.
Okay, so this was captured by using the NVDA screen reader running on Windows. Actually, I just got it to read the contents of this slide, and I was pressing the right arrow to have them announced individually. So we can hear that a screen reader is able to read these less commonly found symbols. It can't read all of them, and we'll talk a little bit later about how the expressions such as mathematics should be encoded in a different way. But to make sure that the screen reader or read aloud has the best chance of representing these symbols, what are the kind of considerations we need to make from an accessibility point of view? James?
So just some quick background. Unicode started in around 1984. There were various attempts and forms to actually create what eventually became the Unicode standard. And this was because more and more people, non-English speaking people, were actually getting computers and utilizing them and trying to, expand into the world. By 1987, a concentrated and cooperative effort was actually built to create what eventually became the Unicode Consortium in 1991. This provided a path to allow for all languages, not just that English Latin base, and allowed them to be consistently represented. Fortunately, Microsoft Word started supporting this in 1996, and Adobe InDesign started supporting it in 1999. Today, it is very unusual to have non-Unicode fonts in any work. There are some niche technical or language areas which are not fully represented in the Unicode standard. Some of these areas basically hack a basic Latin character set to make it look right, but computers only see the code points under it, so they will come back with Latin letters when the screen reader encounters them. So your delta looks fine, but it comes back as the letter D. The author, in most cases, is using a Unicode font. Modern author tools have a multitude of fonts available, and they support this. Should an author need a special font to complete their work, they need to investigate and to make sure they're actually using a Unicode font. The easiest way to do this is to write a text-only email to your friend, paste what you're after into it, and send it. Ask them what it looks like. If they can read it, it's Unicode. If it comes back garbled, then you've got a non-Unicode font. When using non-Unicode, it's actually better, though it may seem backwards, to scan the text. This means you need to write alt text to describe what the text is, but it allows you to pass the information through to the publisher correctly. Whenever you do this, make sure you inform the publisher. The publisher then will take any non-Unicode symbols and try to convert them into a Unicode. They should be able to research and check the entire Unicode set, 1.4 million is it right now, I think, or 1.1 million. And they will check through the languages and look for the particular symbol. If it's not part of the Unicode standard, then they should pass it through as an image and ensure that the alt text describes what the image represents. The days of creating custom fonts are over. Those only create problems and confusion going further down to the distribution partners.
And talking of confusion, James, if someone is using a screen reader and they encounter a strange character that is not Unicode, often their screen reader would be completely silent when they're on it. So even though visually the cursor is moving onto that character and between them, it would just not say anything and not display anything on a braille display if that's how they're reading, or it may say the wrong thing. It may just put strange kind of letters to it because they're somehow mapped across. So that's the kind of end user experience there.
Or if those are the private use.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so some of the symbols we were looking at there, James, were scientific, might be reused in mathematical, physics expressions, and so on. So let's dig in a little bit to scientific expressions. This has in the past been a huge pain point, both for publishers and for end users, hasn't it? And until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, a common approach of including math expressions within a digital publication was to stick an image of that in there, and then we got all sorts of different approaches on the alt text. But in this presentation, I'm often kind of reflecting, my role is to think about the user experience. And from the user experience, let's think about what accessible scientific expressions are. They are where it's possible to make the expression bigger and to adjust the colors. People with low vision, people with cognitive difficulties will often make the book contents larger and may adjust the colors for them. And if it's an image, either they'll get very degraded image, and certainly the colors will not adjust when they change the background, for example. They'd also want to be able to hear the expressions being announced with read aloud or with a screen reader. So spoken to them correctly. And if it's a screen reader user and it's more than a basic math expression, actually hearing that and understanding it just on a stream of audio is really, really hard. So they want to be able to explore that expression with a screen reader. Just as if you wanted to have a word spelled out to you, you would be able to cursor through that expression. With a mathematical expression, it's possible to navigate around the expression, hearing the denominator, the numerator, the indices, what's within an integral sign, all these kinds of things in a kind of tree-like way. This is possible whether you're using an iPhone, whether you're using a Windows computer, a Mac, or whatever. So that's pretty hard to do if the math is included as, say, an image or as plain text. And the way that math is represented in Braille is not kind of character by character. There are mathematical codes for Braille. In the UK and lots of English-speaking countries, they're using UEB, Unified English Braille Math. In the US and in many other countries, they use a way of encoding mathematics called Nemeth. This can be handled by the assistive technology if it's able to get at the math expression itself, not some plain text. So this is what accessible math is from the user's expression, and the answer is to encode the math in some kind of well-recognized and standardized approach. I wonder what that would be, James.
So MathML, the author is the best placed person to know how their equations need to be structured. When writing an equation, even a simple single line one, they should always use the method the authoring tool provides for equations. The importance here is it makes all the equations the same. Authors should also ensure that they use the correct structure in their equations. Don't try to override the system and use text for sine or cosine. Use the actual functions that are provided in the equation creation tool. Because when you use text for those, it strips their identity and then will confuse readers later on. Finally, they should make their equations complete. Sometimes it's quicker to type that A and equal and then go into an equation editor to do the rest of it. That A equal needs to be part of that equation. Otherwise, it's not going to be recognized as part of the equation by the final screen reader. The publisher actually carries the responsibility of converting whatever the author may have created into MathML. The MathML will add structure, which allows the to be able to navigate through piece by piece. It's not too dissimilar from doing structure for the rest of the book. It's just a very minor subset. As with that structure, the MathML conversion needs to be checked for accuracy and consistency as always. But most of that can be automated, and there are already several automated solutions available. The publisher also serves as the final check to ensure all equations have been captured in full in MathML. The partial MathML equation, like the author leaving the A equal sign out, or the author skipping that simple single line equation, those need to be captured and brought into MathML so they are all consistent for the end user. Next slide.
Okay, so just to underline this, accessible math and scientific expressions is not the math expressions as plain text, because sometimes those symbols won't be announced, or they'll be announced incorrectly, as we heard earlier. And it's certainly not math expressions as images with alt text. And if you're curious to learn more, there's a link in the resources that will be sent out, as Karina mentioned, but we published a position paper on when to use plain text or images instead of MathML, and basically the spoiler to that is don't do it, because there are all those downsides that we've discussed. So let's show this in practice with some screenshots. The first screenshot is this is an ebook within Thorium Reader with some mixture of text and mathematics. So if I'm someone who chooses to use or needs to use the dark mode, when I turn that on, I expect my scientific expressions to also be visible, and also to reflect my chosen kind of lighting conditions. So were these expressions to be included as an image with black text on a white background, we would get kind of quite a horrible experience at this point. And if I was someone who wanted a low contrast experience, again, because of an eye condition or because of a cognitive reason, so I'm now showing the screen with a sepia, again, as expected, we see the math expression on a sepia background, or even on a green one. And then as I enlarge the content, I expect the expressions to increase in size or decrease in size in proportion to the text, and also not to experience any kind of blockiness, degradation in that image. So that's from a kind of visual adjustment side of things, and that is working quite well in the demo I've shown you, and across all the different reading systems that we test in a project that we have at the DAISY Consortium, ever since Google included native support for MathML within the Chrome browser view. So next, why don't we experience reading math with a screen reader? So we've got a video that will play now. So there's a little bit of a preamble for this, but and I've highlighted the reading using a visual focus, which will make it easier to follow. So I'll enable the sound and then play the video. This is about 3 minutes long. A demonstration of math accessibility. Many people now understand the importance of making websites and publications accessible to people with disabilities. But have you ever wondered what math accessibility means? This video will show you, as we experience how expressions encoded as MathML in a web page or EPUB ebook can be read with a combination of the NVDA screen reader and the MathCat add-on. Here we're on the Wikipedia page for the quadratic formula, and I can move the screen reader focus to the expression.
With a not equal to 0, the quadratic formula is x equals the fraction with numerator negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and denominator 2a.
The MathML has been processed using speech rules and is read aloud by the text-to-speech and shown in Braille math notation if a Braille display is connected. but now I want to explore this formula. So I'll press the Enter key and I'll hear the confirmation that I've entered the math expression.
Math.
I'll use the right and left arrow keys to move through the mathematical structure, and I can use the down and up arrow keys to zoom in or out to focus on elements of the expression. For the videos, we've added a visual highlight to help explain the concept. So first, I'll zoom in a level so I can hear each side of the equation separately. So I'll press down arrow
X
and then move to the right
equals
and right again.
the fraction with numerator, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and denominator 2a.
Well, this is the fraction I wanted to explore, so I'll zoom in a level going down to hear first the numerator.
In numerator, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac.
And next I'll use the arrow key to hear the denominator.
In denominator, 2a.
And I can even zoom in a further level so I can navigate element by element.
2a.
In the settings menu, numerous options in MathCat can be used to control the speech, navigation, and Braille. For example, a person may choose to have the speech slow down when speaking math expressions, or they can select which Braille notation to use. So now we've experienced how math can be accessible, encoding it as MathML so it can be converted to understandable speech and Braille. Okay, so that's math. Well, I'm sure we'll get some questions on that. But now, James, you're going to tell us about tables.
Tables. Very common in STEM books. The author creating the tabular content needs to organize the information. When doing so, it is the best time to ask if it actually should be a table or not. If the information can be better organized as a list or even just expanded on in text, those approaches should be utilized. The basic rule we have is if you can meaningfully sort the information on a column heading, it is a table. Otherwise, it probably is something else. When a table is needed, the author should use any of the inherent table creation tools in their authoring program. They should not use images. They should not just arrange the text with tabs or white spaces to make it look like a table. The underlying structure of the actual table is very important. The publisher ensures that the tables are converted properly, and they make any non-visual structural changes to a table when they're not really a table. Large tables need additional attention. Some methods to display them in print, like landscape or cross spreads, don't translate to ebooks directly, and they must be reworked. They become a single table structure in a portrait view. Additional semantics are added to the tables to indicate where the headers for the columns are and where the headers for the rows are, which increases navigation. Next.
Great, thanks for that, James. So next we're going to talk about extended descriptions. And did I skip a slide? No. So you'll talk about this and then I'll do a little demo of what this means in a couple of books.
So the author is the subject matter expert here. They are considered the best source for alt text and for extended descriptions as well. A fair amount of STEM images are complex and not completely describable with basic alt text. An extended description is what we consider a study of the image and should include all text present in the image and walk the user through that text in a logical manner. The best part of a long description is it can be more than just text. You can include tables, equations, and even additional text. So things like charts could very easily be converted into a table and presented to the end user as an extended description that way. The publisher organizes any of the extended descriptions and either adds them as a separate page with the appropriate navigation between that page and the image, or they add it in line with the image so it can be accessed immediately. The images which lack extended descriptions but are not fully described by alt text will usually have it created by either the publisher using a subject matter expert, or they take it back to the author and see if they can provide it. Ultimately, though, you have to have it. It would be no different than removing the image for a regular sighted user. This creation, of course, follows the same steps that the author would utilize to organize the data and use it to describe the image. Next, please.
Great. So let's see this in practice with a couple of demos. So up on the screen now, I've opened the Thorium Reader app, and let's take a look at extended descriptions as they're done in these two. So one example you gave there, James, was to where a link is used. So here we have multicultural education in a pluralistic society. It's a title that has plenty of references and this kind of thing. And then we come to an image of a bar graph with multiple colors and all that kind of good stuff. So in terms of alt text, there's very little that can be done to, it'll basically just say this is a bar graph of the countries from which refugees and asylees have come. In fact, what this information is also explained then in the caption, so we wouldn't want to repeat it in the alt text. I should go and see what the alt text is. But my main point is the alt text can only convey fairly limited information. The experience is that someone using a screen reader would hear the image, alt text, then they would hear the figure caption, then they would hear the source, and then they would hear that there's full alternative text available to them. Actually, in the book, this is not visible. It's only heard by a screen reader. I've made it visible for the purpose of this demo. This is a link. This is using the linked approach that James mentioned. So if I now click on that, it takes me to the extended description or the long description. The first thing we encounter is a back link. So if I can quickly navigate back to where I came from, I've included the original image here. It's not in the book itself, but we feel that's best practice. And then there is text that describes the contents in far more detail than is possible with alt text. And as James mentioned, there are different techniques that are then available to us. So this could have been done in a table, and we can include that rich HTML semantics that are really useful, such as we could find a list is useful. We might find that we want to include mathematical expressions. There may be language changes, all these sorts of things, links that are not possible if it's included as alt text, but in a long description, you've got all the power of HTML. So here we have a quick overview of what the bar graph represents, and then it talks us through the content. And at the beginning and at the end, we have a link back to the original piece in the book. So that's the linked approach. The other approach is to use the details element. So here we're in a book called How to Future. In this section, under phases of understanding, we have I guess we call that an infographic with a circular thing and various things going on. Hard to convey the meaning and the learning within that through the alt text, but beneath it we have an item that says figure 1.2 details, and it has a little triangle next to it. And either using the keyboard with a screen reader or using the mouse, I can expand that and reveal the long description or the extended description of that. And the advantage of this is it's in the flow. And, you know, again, I think best practice has evolved to say these kind of long descriptions are often useful to a wider group than only screen reader users. And therefore making it discoverable and visible is kind of helpful for a wider population too. So those are a couple of examples of extended descriptions. Next, we're moving to citations and references.
So, citations and references. First, the author should use any built-in citation manager their authoring tool or program gives them, if it's present. Not all do. When present, these tools give a very consistent method to create and link references. They make very reliable in-text citations, which can be then dynamically updated. The author should also use a style guide, something like Chicago or the American Medical Association. These are usually there is a de facto style guide for any given knowledge space. And that is what the author should be familiar with and should be using. These style guides then provide a very basic structure and consistency. Authors can always improve upon their citations by making sure that every reference is complete. Don't use shortcuts. The publisher then checks the citations against bibliographic references. Some publishers will then check them to make sure they're accurate and will fill in missing details, usually with author permission. The basic perspective the publisher needs to take is that they are tagging the reference correctly. For example, they're using a cite instead of italic when a title is involved in a citation, and they're actually going in and adding the necessary semantic tags both from the in-text citation and to the bibliographic entry itself to identify it to screen reading software. Next, please. Oh, goodness.
Well, we've been having so much fun, but bang on time. We're coming to the end of the slides that we prepared for you. So we've walked through the responsibilities of different folk in order to create accessible scientific and scholarly publications. We've walked through what this means in terms of the user and the responsibilities within the publisher around the use of symbols, scientific expressions, long descriptions, citations, and references. And you're probably all eager to know more. So the resources we've gathered for you were that publication that I mentioned on when to use plain text or images instead of MathML. All of the practices that we've talked about are described in the Accessible Publishing Knowledge Base, which focuses on digital publishing that's using web technologies, so HTML and EPUB. And in each of those, you'll find worked examples, code snippets, links back to standards and specifications, and other useful information. Also, I've included a link to a demo textbook or EPUB with MathML in there in a couple of different languages, so you can see what that looks like and try it out in your own reading systems that you have and play with assistive technologies if you wish. DAISY Consortium has a math mailing list. It's actually one of the most exciting areas of accessibility because it is moving really quickly, and I talked about practice 2 years ago. The practice now, we're much more confident that end users have the tools at their fingertips, and we also know that they're improving all the time too. And where a lot of that activity is happening is on that mailing list. So if you're interested, you could sign up to that. And then lastly, to mention that we have an upcoming webinar, we being DAISY. We have a countdown to the European Accessibility Act series of webinars. We're doing a webinar every month, and it just so happens that in March we're focusing on accessible math and science in digital publications, and on that occasion it'll only be 94 days until the enactment of the European Accessibility Act. So a few resources that we've gathered for you and that maybe Karina will be sending out or will be available in the slide deck. But with that, that's the end of the formal presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard and James. a lot to take in. What I really liked is the, and hopefully our attendees will really enjoy as well, is the demos that you've inserted into your presentations there, just to sort of give life, as it were, to what you have both been talking about. I think that was really, really helpful. So thank you. And also thank you for the heads up on the math and science webinar on the 26th of March as well, where I'm assuming you'll go into a lot more detail on the topics that you've touched on today. There is a lot to take in, and I am conscious that we've covered a lot, and I'm sure each of the areas we've talked about can go into a lot more detail even further. So yeah, so you know, to our attendees, please do take a look at the DAISY website, do have a look at the Accessibility Hub on the BIC website, where you'll find, in both places, you'll find lots of useful information to look into these topics in more detail. So we have the Q&A session now. So if you've got a question, don't be shy. There is no such thing as a bad question. Just type it into the question box that's on your little toolkit that you should see somewhere on your screen, and we'll have a look and we'll get those answered for you as best we can. So it's a really good opportunity. We've got two experts here, so don't be shy, as I've said. But while you're thinking about what to say or what to ask, we have a few questions already. We have some already submitted by attendees that couldn't make it today. So I think one of the first one I want to ask is to James. Given that there is so much to think about here, in addition to the actual topic itself, the topic of math, or the topic of science, whichever it is, there's a whole range of accessibility considerations as well, which the authors may not necessarily be au fait with. What would your advice be to authors who are not necessarily going to be accessibility experts? What would you sort of say to them or point them towards, or what advice would you give, or what advice did Taylor and Francis give, if you're able to share that?
So for authors, we understand they're not accessibility experts, unless ironically they're writing a book about accessibility. So we understand they do not necessarily know the best practice to carry things forwards. A lot of the things we've mentioned already will cover most of what an author really can contribute to the process. So use the right tools, use the equation editors, make things complete. Those things alone really help extend the initial work and provide the that the publisher then can use to finish off any accessibility. For things like alt text and long descriptions, each publisher most likely provides their own style guide. We provide a style guide. It's available to anyone, which goes through the process of how do you describe an image, what the purpose is, how long it should be, what to do in the image. And those items are also commonly available from other spaces, not just, the one publisher. Pretty much every publisher out there has their own style guide. And then finally, the one that's actually often overlooked is color contrast. If you're adding color to your book, talk to your publisher first. See that your colors will work. Color contrast is always a very sticky, very technical area that you have to go through. And if you get it sorted out before you get far into the writing process, it makes life a lot easier, especially if you're having illustrations created.
Yeah. Do you think, James, that authors are generally receptive to perhaps the additional pieces of work that they need to do, or do you find this a surprise, or I suppose they're all different, aren't they? Case by case.
They're all different. Some don't. Some see it as a burden. Some authors actually found that writing alt text was enjoyable. It actually made them review why they had the image. And we've actually had feedback from some authors that said, it actually improved their writing because it forced them to actually critically look at the image and realize, yeah, there was either more there than they thought, or they didn't necessarily need that image. And so, yes, it is a mixed bag. Some don't like doing it. Some actually find it helpful to themselves beyond just being helpful to the reader.
Yeah. And sorry to keep going on about the authors, do you find that does that impact the sort of time that they need to submit content?
It does. There's really no way around that. So writing alt text takes time.
Yeah.
The catch to this is writing alt text, providing a fully inclusive environment. You have to do it across more than just writing your book. You need to do it in your business communications. You need to do it in your classes that you're teaching. And so it should become part of the standard. And by doing it for your book, you certainly get a lot of practice. And then you can carry that across and be, a very pretty much a superstar when you're talking to everyone else.
Yeah. Thank you.
Karina, if I could just add something. So your question was about
course,
kind of getting started on this. So something I didn't include, but I have now updated the slide in the resources, is the Publishing Accessibility Action Group. So there's a community of, I don't know what we're at now, 200 people or something. So if you have a question, then someone else has probably already asked the question. We get all sorts of questions into a mailing list. We have regular meetings. We organize in-person events even as well. It's free to join, and there's a whole community. And don't just think about what you can maybe get from being in that community. You can almost certainly contribute to the community as well. So if you are starting down the line, or if you're an expert, then this group is focused on the UK publishing context. So think about signing up and being a member of the Publishing Accessibility Action Group. So I've included a link on the slide. Thank
you for that reminder there. Yes, because I'd forgotten to put that in my slides as well, so thank you. And also to that point, I should say, if you're joining that group, there's no such, as I've already said, there's no such thing as a silly question, because you can guarantee that if you're thinking of the question, somebody else has probably wanted to ask the same question as well. So yeah, it's a really good group to join. So thinking about sort of getting started again, so we talked a bit about the authors. So if you're a publisher now, I imagine if you're a publisher, a STEM scholarly publisher watching this, if you haven't already started on your accessibility journey, you only have 149 days. But if you haven't, and there will be some that haven't yet, might be thinking, that's a lot to take in. There's so many different areas. Where do I start? I know it's a difficult question, but on a sort of very basic level, what words of encouragement might you give, and where would you sort of recommend that they begin this process, this accessibility journey?
So for a publisher, the starting point, if you haven't started, one, you communicate to your people, to your authors, this is something you're going to do. That's going to have to be the first step. So everyone knows when it suddenly starts appearing in the workflow and things like that, why it's there. And that way they can support it. From a technical point of view, structure your document. The moment you do that, you've just reached about 70% of the path to an accessible document. So you have sections, they're in chapters, they all have headings. You're using the correct tags like paragraph or block quote for quotes. asides for footnotes. Once you're doing that, a lot of the end work is already done for the final user to actually consume it. And that portion of it is actually easy. Even if your author is not necessarily providing good content, you already have a typesetter or someone like that who's looking at it and adding some sort of structure. You just need to realize it's there, and you just convert it into that HTML structure. That's why I basically recommended HTML, because it's very similar to what you're going to need. The alt text, you have to figure out how to get it written, whether your authors write it, which, as I said, is the preferred. You go find subject matter experts. You have subject matter experts who can do it. You're writing to describe the image. We classify alt text as glancing at the image, and long descriptions as studying the image. It takes about 5 minutes to write alt text for an image. I'm slow, so, but you know, it can be done at scale. Yeah, you're going to have to find out external help to guide you along. That was that. And again, as Richard said, there are plenty of groups out here who are willing to help. You know, Daisy's there to help.
Yeah.
You know, W3 is technically there to help. BIC's here to help. We can guide you through this and tell you exactly what you need to do. And so utilize that.
Definitely. Definitely.
I can tell a little story about a publisher that found their way to me. They're about to publish a book. Again, lots of, in this case, it was mainly references that was their concern, but they'd never kind of thought about their ebooks and the accessibility of them. And so they were kind of a little bit trepidatious of what this conversation was going to be like. And so was I too, because how is this going to go? So as it turned out, it's a very happy ending, because they didn't do their own ebook production. Like many publishers, they used an external vendor, and it was on the vendor to know what they were doing, and the vendor knew what they were doing. And so they were unconsciously producing very accessible ebooks. There was very little to really kind of comment on, because the vendor was skilled. So if you're using a vendor, talk to your vendor about, you know, how have they prepared, not only for the European Accessibility Act, although that's a big pressure in the UK, but there's also legislation coming very soon and hot on the heels of that in the US and in other jurisdictions too. So this is a one-way direction, in that this is about digital publications are going to need to be more accessible and better for everyone, because of, if not regulations and law, because of procurement practice and your business drivers for having things that are repurposable and all those sorts of things. So it may well be, in this case of this tiny publisher, they produced 10 books a year, and it was a very easy conversation once they realized they were already dealing with a publisher who knew their onions, and lots of vendors actually know what they're doing. So that might be helpful and reassuring for some folk. And if you're using a vendor that isn't up to speed, you need to be I would suggest talk to them about that, and maybe even switch vendor, because there's lots of training and support and even certification out there to support vendors.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that's actually quite encouraging, because you may unknowingly be further ahead the accessibility journey than you actually think you are. Yeah, thank you. Very good point, both of you. Thank you. So we've talked about authors and publishers, so let's move on to distributors. What do distributors need to be mindful of, both in light of the EAA, but also accessibility generally? What workflows do they need to consider? What do they need to think about in terms of working with their trading partners, etc., etc.? Do they need to consider anything apart from what we've already discussed?
So the European Accessibility Act is not about the content of the ebook. It is about the content of the ebook, but so much more. So it would also talks about the whole kind of ecosystem, because that, as I described on the very first slide with those ducks, it's about all those ducks being in a row. If something breaks in the accessibility chain, it's a broken end user experience. And how frustrating for an author or for a publisher who's made all that special effort, and then the distribution platform that's being used is not accessible to someone who's using assistive technology. They can't actually find the book, or when it comes to the buy button or something like that, or there's some date picker in there that doesn't work. So that the website has to be accessible. If it's through a website or if it's through an app, that has to be accessible too. And we already touched on at least the reading apps. And then there's the really important piece about accessibility metadata, which James will explain a little bit about.
So that goes back to I mentioned Onyx. There are a lot of data distribution methods, but the EPUB accessibility requirements actually give a very clear indication of what the publisher needs to report. Now, if the publisher reports that a book is accessible, or even a book isn't accessible, there's no shame in saying, my book doesn't quite meet it. Telling the user up front is a lot better than them being surprised. Those distribution partners need to be able to take that and present it to the user, so then they can make that purchase decision. The data travels with the EPUB, but most distribution partners are going to utilize the Onyx feed coming from the publisher. Onyx has already taken care of the data, provided us plenty of places to put it. So a publisher which is on their game should be sending it out already. And there's, oh, okay.
No,
and
I'm
then
just agreeing with you.
And there's currently work within which group is it? I lose which groups I'm participating in. I think it's W3 group, where we're specifying how those distributors then can display a truncated version so the average user can read it and understand and say, oh yeah, that book will work for me. Or maybe not. I'll need to go to the publisher and ask them, why doesn't it work with my Braille reader or whatever. But that should be finished very soon and then released, giving the distribution partners a little bit of time to tweak their websites so they can present that information.
Yeah, we have a, on that note, James, we have a, in fact, our next webinar in, what month are we in? In February, nearly in February now. Our next one is looking at sort of websites, platforms, etc. Also looking at packaging of the content that is being purchased, whether that's physical or digital. So looking at all of that. And also for those that might be interested, we had a webinar on accessible metadata in September, and that recording is on our YouTube channel as well. So do go and have a look at that. So so thank you.
So I know I'm jumping in on each one, but I like to bring the kind of user experience. So let's move forward into June of 25, and the European Accessibility Act is there. And because of all the excellent work of all those ducks, there are accessible ebooks out there. But there's also a lot of ebooks that are not accessible. So suddenly the importance of this accessibility metadata becomes even more critical, I suppose. People do not want to have to download a book in order to then figure out whether or not they can use it or not. They want to be able to tell that. Sometimes people kind of relate this to food labeling. Back in the day when I could eat anything I liked without any kind of worrying, I wasn't so bothered about the labeling that goes on food packets and so on. But now I really rely on that information to make sure that there's something in there that isn't actually going to make me ill. And so it's easy to understand, isn't it, that someone who wants to ensure that if there are images in there, that they are described, if there are mathematical expressions, that they are there properly as MathML. And also from the publisher's point of view, if you've done that work, celebrate it and convey it, because it's a selling point, especially for institutions that want to make sure that they are anticipating that their customers, their students, if it's an educational institution, will have different needs, and they don't always, not everyone declares that they have a reading disability or even kind of acknowledges it, but would make use of those kind of good features too. So yeah, accessibility metadata is a really critical thing, and really hoping that that display guide information comes out soon through that W3C group, because that will mean that people will there'll be a kind of common language to how the code within the book or transported through Onyx will actually be conveyed to an end user, so that they have a kind of consistent experience, and it's not, lots of different labeling approaches, as it were. So they know what to look for and to watch out for too. So do your good accessibility work and then celebrate it through your accessibility metadata. It is actually part of the European Accessibility Act, so an important thing to think about. So, and in terms of those platforms and distributors displaying that accessibility metadata that's been included, is a helpful thing. And there are distributors out there that have some good practices right now.
Yeah, and to that point again, it's important that the standardization of that information as well is really important, so that it's just thinking about the end user, they're not getting sort of ambiguous information or inconsistent information. I think that's really key, that there's a sort of general broad understanding of when we say this, it means this for the user. So I think that's a vital piece of work. So yeah, we'll be watching out for that guidance to come out, definitely. So Richard, changing tack a little bit, but obviously still on the same topic. How do you get MathML from a Word document or another document, or whichever document your author's using or that you might be using in-house? How does that all work?
Okay, so my wife is an editor of a journal, and pretty much all the manuscripts she gets are in Word. It's, 2 billion plus users of that word processor on the planet. Like it or not, Word is very, very commonly used. Unfortunately, they've really upped their game in terms of their math editor within Microsoft Word. They do not use MathML within Word. They use their own XML system, which is called Office Math Markup Language, or Office Math, I think it's referred to. But the good news is, when it's there in your Word document, as long as you've inserted it as a math equation, it's simply a data structure that then can be transformed into other ways of representing mathematics. Here we're talking about MathML. So how do you go from OMML out to MathML? So I know a bit about this because I'm involved in the Word to EPUB tool that we use at DAISY. So lots of organizations use that to create accessible ebooks if they're starting from Word, and that will convert both math type and Office math expressions to MathML. That's a free download, although you'd need to have a licensed copy of math type if you're trying to convert math type expressions. And right at the heart of Word to EPUB is Pandoc. So actually, if you're more technical, you can simply use the tool Pandoc, because that's what's actually doing the transform of the Office math flavor of mathematics into the MathML thing. So if you want an easy experience to produce either EPUB or HTML or even Kindle books, you can do that from within Word to EPUB, or you want to go straight to the tool and roll your sleeves up and start working with that. Pandoc does that work as well. So the critical thing being making sure it's in there as a math equation within Word and not a picture of it. If you're starting with pictures, say you're working from something that's got images, there are tools that will help you insert that as proper mathematics into Word. Tools like MathPix, for example, you can use you mark with your mouse, rubber banding, I think it's called, around an equation, and then it will paste it into your math expression. I think it has a tool also to convert a whole document if you're starting with a LaTeX document or a PDF or something like that. I think it'll do some of that too. But there you are. It's entirely possible if you're going from Word to get to MathML.
Great. And I'm assuming that goes for other, does that go for other sort of file formats? Okay, Excel or
equations, ironically. Yes, I mean, the basic system that Microsoft uses is the same.
Yeah.
They don't behave the same with the interface, but the transformation methodology should be roughly the same.
Yeah.
LaTeX, of course, that's the big math one. LaTeX has a lot of already pre-developed routines to convert LaTeX code into MathML. So those are, you just go check your repository and see what your brand of LaTeX has, but I'm sure it's there.
Yeah. Okay. Another sort of change of direction slightly. We have a question that's come in. What are your thoughts on how AI might potentially assist in this area? Just give you a few moments to think about that, because we've sprung that one on you.
I don't need to think, because the question comes along all the time. I'm actually writing an article at the moment at 10 different ways that AI will impact on organizations that are members of the DAISY consortium. So they are specialist organizations, but one area that's, well, those organizations do a lot of remediation, and it's possible that publishers are also doing remediation of their backlist. And one of the pain points is going and doing that structure job that James referred to. And so for a lot of the conversions, actually people are not getting that structure, and they're having to go through and apply it afterwards. So we're quite hopeful that AI will really help with inferring the structure from effectively using computer vision, seeing that this heading is bigger and it's positioned this way. And so for this type of publication, that's probably a heading level 3 or a 4 or a whatever. This is going to be a footnote. This is an endnote. This is a table, and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So that is going to be interesting. Also, recognizing all those ebooks that have been produced where there are equations as images. Hopefully there's the source for them back in the day, but that's not always the case. And the recognition of those images and turning that into MathML is actually very accurate and looks good. It still needs review, but that's not like a really future thing. There are libraries out there that do that now. Scholarly and STEM publications include lots of images and charts. You cannot rely on AI to write the image descriptions and the long descriptions for you, but you know what? They're really helpful in helping you do the job. They speed it up. So it kind of doesn't matter whether it gets you 20% of the way there or 80% of the way there. I think it'll depend on the types of images and the type of content and those sorts of things, but it's definitely a helpful tool. I very rarely write image descriptions with an empty box now. I'll usually use one of a range of tools to generate something for me. The game
Start.
hasn't changed. You still, lots of them will generate image descriptions that are far too detailed and far too long and all that kind of stuff. So you still need to follow the principles of writing good image descriptions. I like, James, your description of the glance thing. So if you ask, name an AI tool, DeepSeek, there we are. That's one that we've got from, I don't know that it's doing images yet. I think it doesn't actually. It can't anyway. They'll generate long stuff. Please don't just paste that in and think I'm done. It's think about, as James said, if you don't have good alt text, what's the effect of basically taking out that image? If the image is important, spend the time on writing good alt text that gives someone the understanding of why that image is there and what it's trying to display, and that's different to AI describing it. And then there's a whole range of other really interesting applications of AI, and I'm sure there's a queue of vendors knocking on your door telling you what amazing solutions they've got that are AI powered. I was talking with someone from a big tech company last week, and they said where we are, there's this huge sucking sound, and it's the sound of their own AI technology basically drawing all the resources, because that's what's getting all the focus. So it's exciting, but also there's the grunt work to do. There's only a few number of days to EAA. It's got lots of promise. There are some applications now, but we all know it's not the silver bullet that will solve all our problems, but it'll be really helpful. The last thing I'd say was there's then this is all stuff that's related to the kind of publishing process. The end user experience might be really empowered as well. So imagine getting one of your books and then someone can either use their screen reader or read aloud to kind of read through that content. If you have someone with dyslexia or something where they understand the content, but just dealing with pages and pages of text is really tricky for them, to use the AI to maybe summarize, to ask questions of your publication, to ask it a bit about the image, where you've done good image descriptions, but you can ask it other things. This, I think, is a really interesting future area of the AI for the end user as an additional kind of assistive technology for them. So yeah, exciting times. What are your thoughts, James?
No, I agree with pretty much everything you've said. There are tools which are growing in complexity and accuracy. That's the important part, is accuracy. The equation problem will be an equation problem for all the old backlists where it is just images, in some cases paper. But so there are ways to bring that forward. The one caveat I would add to all this is it's not a final solution. Make sure you, as a publisher, are confident that your name can be applied to that book. So if something is found, goes wrong, whatever, you're ready and willing to say, yes, that was us. And that is a very important thing. A lot of people are rushing and using alt text for AI, or AI for alt text, and correcting books and everything else. But we've gone through and actually looked at what we're getting in some of those test cases, and it's like, no, we don't. And we take it and push it aside and say, come back when you're ready. Because it is the publisher's name that's on that book. It's our logo, not the AI's. So.
Good point. Thank you. Just in the last few minutes that we have, I had quite a specific question come in. Why is it considered best practice to number all displayed equations? Who wants to take that? James?
That one probably goes back to my typesetting days. So you have to roll back many years when actually tracking all this was difficult. You would number them, one, because they're important. You're going to reference them in text. So the only way to do that is to apply an identifier, the number in this case. But really, really long time ago, before we had MathML, before MathType was generating really good material and everything else, you basically ended up with images, handwritten images in some cases. So you need to identify those images and then identify where they go. So a lot of the numbering within mathematics is probably just a holdover from the old days. Now, today, again, if it's cited, if it is important, put a number on it because you're going to refer to it elsewhere. Think of the end user as well. If the professor is teaching a class and says equation 522, well, that makes it easy for the students to immediately find it rather than page 128, third equation down. So yes, you could probably weed out the boring equations that no one cares about anymore. Well, people care about them, they otherwise wouldn't be there. But the ones that don't have as much individual significance, those can probably not carry a number. But yes, a lot of best practices are from old practice. My personal favorite is EPUB. EPUB is a best practice in a lot of publication reference, bibliographic citations, bibliographic. Is it fit for the modern age? No, it's not. Because you're basically saying, oh, look at the last reference. So a lot of those old best practices, it's time to look at them again. Is it still a best practice?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the best, I mean, we come across this all the time at BIC, it's what we do, best practice. The best practice is there to help. It's not there just to create issues, it's there to actually ultimately help. And if it's not helping, then it's time for a new best practice.
Yes.
Thank you. Richard, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I'm glad that James answered that because this is not my.
Okay.
Other than agreeing then that some equations might be boring, that is possible.
I'm not a mathematician. I can type mathematics with a text editor. I'm not a mathematician.
Yes, it depends who you are, doesn't it? I suppose. All right, we're nearly out of time. We've got one last question I'm going to squeeze in just before we finish, which may or may not be a quick one, I don't know. What about HTML and PDF? Do we want to go there? We've got 3 minutes.
So I'll try and speak quickly and then James will fill in. So,
we can go over a little bit. But
EPUB is basically HTML with packaged with some other superpowers. So pretty much, I think all the things we've talked about are relevant for HTML. They're basically using HTML things. I think I'd have to struggle to think about if there's anything that we've mentioned, it wouldn't relate directly to HTML. I'm not sure there is. So it would be done in a slightly different way, something like extended descriptions or long descriptions, but same principles, really. So that's good. PDF, of course, widely used for scholarly publications, journals especially. So principles like using Unicode, having structure, image descriptions, those are all relevant. I do not believe there's a way of doing extended descriptions within PDF. And also, I think accessible mathematics is possible in theory, but I don't think we're there yet in terms of having the authoring tools or reading tools that actually support it. So it's kind of theoretical right now. So I think lots of the principles apply whatever digital format you're using, but because of all the effort and combined work that's going into it, the tools and components and technology stack of the open web, of HTML, CSS, and of EPUB, which of course is all based on the open web technologies, that's where the most accessibility and cross compatibility lies. Anything to add on that, James?
Not really. The EPUB, HTML, I mean, they're cousins, maybe even siblings, really. Really the only difference is some of the structural semantics, and those shouldn't play havoc. If you put them in an HTML, yeah, they'll cause problems, but taking them out may reduce some of the functionality. But those are very close together. We treat them as the same effectively. PDF, as Richard said, some people say that yes, it is possible. We have not explored going that route because the exploration we discovered quickly was resource intensive. So we decided to say, well, EPUB is a lot easier to get to in that regard. So we focus our efforts there. We still provide PDFs for those who want it, but with the understanding that if you really need a fully accessible experience, go visit our EPUB.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. We've just gone over time. We're a minute over, so unfortunately, I'm sure there's lots of other things we could have talked about today, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to call it to a close. So I would just like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to both of you on behalf of everyone in attendance, but also on behalf of BIC and me personally. So thank you, James and Richard, both for taking the time to prepare and present today. I know how busy both of you are at the moment. So thank you so much for squeezing us in. We're going to make the presentation slides available for this event on our website shortly, probably next week now, being realistic. And a recording of the whole webinar will be sent to you all ASAP. Again, I say ASAP, probably next week. So don't panic if you haven't got it by the end of today or tomorrow. It is coming. Just bear with us. We'll also post the recording to our YouTube channel in about a month's time. And if you want to see that on YouTube, if you're signed up to our mailing list, you'll get a notification of when that's ready. Finally, to you, our attendees, I'd like to say thank you for joining us today. Please do stay in touch. You can find out more about BIC and the work we do on via the links on the screen right now and via our website. And remember to take a look at our accessibility hub. And as I've said, you can stay in touch with everything we're doing via our mailing list. Go also and have a look at the DAISY website, have a look at their webinar sessions as well. And that's it. So thank you for staying to the end, and we hope to see you at another BIC event in the near future. So until then, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.